Okay, so it's another rainy day here in southeastern Virginia, and I saw this pumpkin cinnamon rolls recipe that Becky at Acre Homestead did. And the moment that I saw her do them, I really wanted to try it. So I've got the recipe that she linked in her video, and then I'll also link her video if you guys want to go and watch it. She's awesome. She's so fun to watch and very knowledgeable, and just there's that one of those like cozy, super authentic. She tries stuff and then cooks stuff that she already knows. So it's just really nice. So I thought I would bring you guys along with me. We'll make them together. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything set up. I'm going to bring my mixer out and get all my ingredients together. I mean, I'm telling you, once again, just don't know. So I've never made this recipe before, so this will be a first for all of us. What did I do last time? Oh, I forgot my bowl. Okay, so Becky did it in like a kind of like a kneading machine. I don't have one of those, so I'm just gonna do it with my mixer. Also going to dump more flour in here, although how much flour do we actually need? 4 cups. This calls for bread flour. I'm gonna use the flour that I have. I think I have 4 cups in there. I'm also preparing for a birthday party that I'm hosting. So as you can see, the decorations and stuff, I'm hosting this weekend. So I'm trying to make sure that I have enough ingredients for the cake that I'm going to be making. So I'm trying to make sure that I don't use up all the ingredients that I got for the cake, but I really wanted to make this recipe. So hopefully we have enough. We will. It'll be okay. Okay, so for the first thing, it says 3/4 of a cup of milk, whole 2% or almond milk will work. I have almond milk, so that is what I'm going to be using, and it is vanilla almond milk, so hopefully that is going to work. Now, it also says quick rise yeast. I do not have quick rise yeast. I have active dry yeast. And so my yeast needs to be activated, so it actually needs to kind of proof for about 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do to change this recipe a little bit is I'm going to actually warm my milk up, because it doesn't call for any water. Yeah, so I'm going to warm my milk up. I'm going to put my sugar, which I'm actually going to substitute for honey. I'm going to put my honey in my milk in my bowl and then add my yeast to it, and I'm gonna let it sit while I get all the other ingredients together. So that way my yeast can be activating while I'm getting the other ingredients together, but also my yeast needs time to activate. If I was just to add my yeast to this bowl and just dump all the ingredients in, it probably wouldn't rise correctly, because my yeast, I'm actually gonna link the article or the website, the link for it down below. I'm going to try to remember to do that. I had a question on my other bread making video, and she had a really valid question. She said she had bread machine yeast and would it work? And I said, you know what? I really don't know the answer to that. So I did some digging and I found this great little link that describes the difference between the yeasts, and I thought that it was really good. So I'm going to put that down there so you guys can go and do kind of your own perusal of that. But basically my understanding of it was quick rise yeast or bread machine yeast. They're smaller granules, but they also don't have the coating of dead yeast cells around them. So they don't last as long, say in the freezer and storage, but they don't need that initial rising period or proofing period, or the way that I say it is an activation period, in order to break away the dead cells in order to get to the living cells within the center of the yeast. So for me, I have the active dry yeast, which is like kind of the living cells are capsulated or encapsulated within the dead cells, which makes it last longer in storage. And I also have to soak it, like I have to let it activate. So that's what I'm going to do. Hopefully, well, it'll turn out okay. We're gonna be positive about this. I think it's still gonna be delicious. And this is the thing that I love about cooking, and also causes some anxiety, if I'm being honest, is that you really can kind of play around with it. Now, is there a chance that this is all going to go terribly wrong and it's not going to taste anything like the one that is in this recipe? Yeah, sure. But there's also a really good chance that it's going to be delicious and turn out just fine. So I'm going to use what I have, which is kind of my MO. The only thing that I got extra was the pumpkin puree, because I probably have some buried somewhere within the cans within my pantry, but I was already at Walmart and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to grab a can because I don't feel like digging through the cans. So that's really the only thing that I had to buy extra and go out of my way. All of the other stuff I have on hand, and I'm just going to kind of dig out of the pantry. So here I'm going to warm up my milk just a little bit here on the stove. The milk is coming straight out of the refrigerator, so it is cold, and I would not want to add my yeast to that. So it calls for, I think, 3/4 of a cup of milk, and I am using the almond milk, and then I choose to use honey instead of granulated sugar. It calls for 1/4 of a cup granulated sugar, so I'm going to do just a little bit less honey. So I did like right under the line by maybe 1/4 of an inch, if that. So I just kind of eyeballed it. I did not do an exact measurement, and then I'm going to mix that honey in. It wasn't working very well because the milk was cold, so I went and got a whisk out, which worked a lot better. Testing it with my finger is both dangerous but also effective, because if it's too hot for my finger, it's most likely way too hot for yeast. So I'm not recommending that you stick your finger in hot milk, but it's what I do. Okay. So I stepped away from it for just a moment, and now it's come up to, what, 135, 134, around there. So that's good, because as soon as I add this to the bowl, it's probably gonna drop in temperature. All right, I'm gonna add this to my bowl. This is the almond milk, honey. Test the temperature again. We're at 126. I'm going to whisk it for a little bit. You guys hear Chubby Cheeks on the back porch? They have a whole yard. They have a huge chicken yard, and they are convinced that the back porch is somewhere made just for them. And then of course they proceed to defecate on the porch. So I'm making my milk all frothy, which is not intentional. Okay, we're at 122.7, which is good. So this recipe calls for 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. And I'm going to mix this in. Hoping that the frothiness on the top isn't going to make it so the yeast isn't able to get down into the liquid. But we're just going to go with it. I'm going to get a shirt that says we're just going to go with that. Or that's my MO. So this is what my yeast looks like right after I put it in the bowl. And I'm glad to see that the bubbles, these bubbles are from the milk, from when I was whisking the milk. That's not from the yeast. Although you can kind of see the yeast starting to activate over here. See it kind of, those little specks. That's the yeast activating. Okay, so while that's activating, I'm going to add my other ingredients. I should probably look. Okay, transfer warm milk and sugar to the bowl. Stir pumpkin puree, room temperature egg, and melted butter, mixing until smooth and well combined and creamy. Next, stir in bread flour, pumpkin pie spice, and salt with a wooden spoon until a dough begins to form. I'm gonna melt my butter, which I need 1/4 cup of. I am doing this the hard way. This isn't typically how I would measure butter, but because I don't want to get a new stick out of the refrigerator, because I want to make sure I have enough for my recipes on Saturday for the birthday, I'm doing it this way. I'm going to use my trusty 4-cup measure. This recipe is calling for 3/4 cup pumpkin puree. All right, that's our pumpkin added. Now, 1/4 cup, 1 egg at room temperature. These eggs are from my chickens. I am going to break it into a bowl just to make sure it looks good. I do have a broody hen, so the possibility of her trying to brood this and then it not working and then it being gross was high. To make sure that that doesn't happen and I don't ruin my mixture. I'm just gonna make this come together. I am gonna add a little bit of vanilla. It doesn't call for vanilla, but I'm gonna add some anyway. I think that Becky added some as well. I'm always kind of liberal with my spices, especially when it comes to sweet things. And that does say 2 tablespoons, although that does seem like a lot. Like, it really changed the color of my pumpkin. Oh, something in here is making me itch. Calls for 3/4 teaspoon salt. Add this to my yeast, but I'm going to show you what the yeast looks like first. See how bubbly and frothy and soft it looks? and it's not doubled in size, but it's grown a good bit. All right. So now we're gonna add our pumpkin mixture. I'm only going to add 3 cups to start, and then I'm going to wait and see what my texture looks like before I add the 4th. Okay, so based on the way that it's looking, I'm definitely going to need to add more flour. See how it's starting to really stick to those sides again? So that was about a 1/2 cup more. Oh. I am gonna add maybe a tablespoon more. And see if that brings it together to a texture that I am happy with. It smells so good. All right. It's bogging my mixer down quite a bit. All right, I think that is about perfect. Okay, so it wants me to knead the dough on low speed for 8 to 10 minutes. Dough should form into a nice ball and be slightly sticky. Okay, so we're gonna leave it to knead for a little bit longer, because I don't think that it's been 8 minutes, even 10. Even 8 or 10. Okay. So now we're going to transfer it out. I'm a lot less of an organized cook when I don't know the recipe. Is anybody else like that? Probably. Guys, I wish you could smell it. Here, ready? It's so good. This is where a bowl with a handle would come in super handy. What are some fun fall recipes that you guys really like? Okay, so it tells me to knead it into a nice dough ball, just like with my other recipe. Most bread has you do this, at least in the way that I am, in the technique that I'm using. This is what I do. I get as much of the flour off as I can. And then my oil is a little bit warm. I wish it was just a touch warmer, but that's okay. I'm going to rub this all around the edges. Now I'm not going to push too hard because it's already started to activate, and the more I push down on it, the more I'm disrupting that process from happening, as well as if I rub it really hard, it disrupts this nice smooth surface that I am aiming for. I have a little bit too much oil in here, so I think what I'm gonna do is just dump it into my cup measure here. That's better. So then I'm going to take my dough ball, put it down into my bowl. It should be known that I didn't even read the recipe before coming on here and doing it with you guys. So I'm doing it just right alongside you, and we're going for it. So this says to cover with plastic wrap and a warm towel. I'm undecided on whether I'm going to follow the rules of the warm towel. We'll see. I'm going to have it in a warm place, which is right on top of my oven, which I started to 350 degrees. Maybe we'll be good little recipe followers and just put a towel over it. I have a strong feeling that it would be perfectly fine without the towel, but we're just gonna choose to follow the recipe today. I am gonna put another one of these down on my stove top to sit between the bread, dough, and my stove top. All right, warm towel. That won't be warm for long. All right, it says to rise it for an hour, so that's what we're gonna do. This is what it looks like, and it has already grown. So the timer just started. This hasn't technically started the timer on it yet. And now begins the super satisfying cleanup portion. I don't know, do you guys enjoy watching somebody else clean their kitchen up after a project as much as I do? Or is it just me? I'm actually going to keep this in a pile over here for whenever I need it again, because I'm trying to really skimp on flour, which I should do every time, but I don't. Okay, so from here out, you have voiceover, Jenny, because the house is no longer somewhat quiet again. So here I'm just getting ready to take the dough out of its first rise. And I'm going to punch all the air out of it. And then put it on my floured surface. And remember that any flour that you put on this surface is going to be mixed into your dough. So you only want to put just enough in order to make it so that it doesn't stick to your surface, but not so much that it's going to make your dough more dense in the end product. So now I'm just flattening it out. And I needed a little bit more flour because it was sticking to my fingers. You don't want it to stick to anything either, because then you get rid of that nice smooth surface that's going to help it rise correctly. So I figured I would just go ahead and get my rolling pin and roll it out. Now, my aim is to roll it into a rectangular shape so that when I roll it into my spiral end cinnamon roll, it is easier to roll up, and you're going to see that. Now, this is one of the steps that I probably struggle with the most. Tacking it to the sides of the counter, to the counter on the ends, like you just saw me do, is a really good trick to keep it so that it won't spring back. So here I've done rolling it out, and I'm going to be spreading butter, a nice thick-ish layer of butter, really however much butter you want, to this first layer of our cinnamon roll. If you put too much butter, it's once again going to make your cinnamon rolls more soupy and take them much longer to cook. So you want to find that balance, but the more sugar and butter you add, the more caramelization happens. So don't go overboard with it, but this is something that you can play around with. I am not measuring any of this. I'm just going based on what I want for these cinnamon rolls. I'm doing probably a medium thick layer. I used a cup measure, half a cup measure here. So I'm doing coconut sugar was that first layer, and now I'm going in with some honey, just because coconut sugar isn't quite as sweet as normal sugar. And then I'm putting pumpkin spice seasoning as well as some cinnamon. The recipe does not call for cinnamon, but I just thought it would add a really nice touch, and it did. It was so delicious. And I put a generous amount of cinnamon, I guess. I heard somebody else say that they measure seasonings and spices with their heart, and I thought that was such a good representation of it, because I definitely do the same. So now this is a little trick that my mom taught me, and you're going to hear that a lot in my cooking, and that is to fold in just a little bit of the edges all the way around your dough. And this helps all of what is that stuff called in the middle? Yeah, that stuff. The stuff that you're thinking in your mind. The stuff that you just put in there. It's going to keep it all, the filling. That's what I was trying to say. The filling, it's going to keep it all within the roll instead of letting it just ooze out the ends. Because the first couple times I made cinnamon rolls, I was so frustrated because all of the nice, delicious things that I just put in there just would come oozing out the end. And I was so frustrated. And my mom was like, yeah, do the folding thing. And I said, oh my goodness. So that has been life-changing. And then I also pinch the dough to itself on the top, which really helps the roll stay together as well. And that was just a little trick that I figured out as I made lots and lots and lots of cinnamon rolls. So here I'm going to kind of squish it and squeeze it a little bit to try to get them the roll to be the same size the whole way down. And it's not the end of the world if it doesn't look perfect. It's going to taste delicious. Now I'm going to cut them. I'm cutting them about to an inch thick. So each roll is about an inch thick vertically. So I'm just going to keep cutting, and I'm not measuring as I cut. I use my hand. My mom also taught that to me, is if you use kind of like your first finger as a measuring tool, it works really well. But you can measure it. If you want to measure it, you absolutely can. The recipe says that this makes 12 cinnamon rolls. I don't actually even know how many it made in the end. I'm sure I could count them, or you can count them and tell me. I had 2 left over, so I have these little mini pans, and I put them in that. Now, when I do this again, I'm going to not put them in a baking pan like this, and you're going to see why. I'm going to put them on a cookie sheet. I put them, or maybe I will put them in the pan, but I won't put as many in the pan. because they were just too close together and they popped up, and you'll see at the end. I mean, they were still delicious. It did not affect the taste at all. So this is right before the first rise begins. So this is what they looked like right before that. We're just cleaning up the counter again. If you don't have one of these scrapers, they are life-changing. This is about halfway through the second rise. And then this is right before we're going to put them in the oven. And so you can see how much they've filled up the pan. They've risen into themselves. So we're going to put them right into the oven here. I'm just trying to figure out what's going to work the best, how they're going to cook the best. I think the left side of my oven is hotter, so I have to always finagle that a little bit. Now the ones that were in this little pan cooked quicker. So they came out and were perfectly cooked, delicious, but I had to put the big pan back in for about 5 more minutes. And I think the timer that I set was 20 minutes because my oven runs a little bit hot. So here you see how they all puffed up and kind of exploded on themselves. That's because they were too tight. They didn't have anywhere to go out, so they just went up. So once again, it did not affect the flavor at all. They were delicious. I mean, so good. My whole family wanted me to make them again that night, and they only lasted for maybe a night and a half. Or a night in the following day, and they were so good. It added so much warmth and comfort to add all of those spices to the dough itself. These will definitely be a go-to in my household from now on. The pumpkin and the spices, and yet it still tasted like a cinnamon roll. Delicious.